You're listening to Car Free Midwest.
We're a podcast based in Omaha, Nebraska, exploring the stories, barriers, and joys of getting around the Midwest without a car.
Our goal is to build a community around more transportation equity and less car dependency.
I'm Rachael Johnson.
And I'm Joshua LeBure.
This
is Car Free Midwest. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in to today's episode of Car Free Midwest. This is your co-host Joshua LeBure, and I'm actually not on this episode this week. Sarah had a great conversation with Melanie Davis, a return guest from Mode Shift Omaha, and a first-time guest named Rachael Johnson from the Omaha Mayor's Commission for Citizens with Disabilities. And they had a really good conversation. This was my first time hearing it with y'all, and I learned a ton. So I'm proud to put this episode out there. I'm bummed that I missed out on this conversation, but I was out at the True Falls Film Festival covering it for my radio show. But enjoy the conversation. It's very informative and, not lacking in passion.
All right. So, Rachael, I obviously know my friend Melanie Davis here who's with us, but I don't know you, and I'm excited to get to meet you. So if you can just kind of start with a little bit of an introduction, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. So the circumstances that allowed me to meet Melanie actually are because I was asked to join the Commission for Citizens with Disabilities, the Mayor's Commission, on a volunteer basis to help meet the needs of Omaha's disabled population and recognize where is the city falling short when it comes to that. And I was introduced to that by my friend Ed Armstrong, who works for QLI. I was introduced to QLI as a client when I had a spinal cord injury 8.5 years ago now, back in 2013. I was involved in a rollover car accident where I was driving sleep deprived. I kind of left in the middle of the night to go on a spontaneous trip to visit a friend and really hadn't thought it through and thought about the fact I hadn't slept much the night before. And so I like to speak on, awareness of sleep deprived driving, but also, in the past 8.5 years that I've grown to learn how to adapt to life with a spinal cord injury. I've also learned that unfortunately there are a lot of shortcomings still in a lot of different areas when it comes to being able to just easily function in society. And so that's why I'm really happy to have been given the opportunity to serve on the Mayor's Commission and meet folks like Melanie and you, so that we can kind of come together on these issues, and figure out how can we improve.
Awesome. Thank you for that background. How long did you say you've been on this commission?
Oh goodness, it's been coming up on 3 years now, I think. I don't think they've had me sign a renewal, and I know it's a 3-year.
Cool. What do you feel like, have there been any, I don't know if you want to call them wins, or what types of initiatives have you been excited about so far with your time on that commission?
Mostly I've been excited about being able to learn and then just pass that information on to others who may not, really have ties into, the lifestyles of folks with disabilities and those who do. We always have guest speakers every month. We come together and decide who those folks should be and what we're going to gain from what they have to present and how we're going to pass that knowledge along. For example, we've had people from the police academy come out and, they talk about the training programs for new police and talking about how there are programs in place to train officers on how they should handle situations with folks with various disabilities. What do you do if you're engaging with someone who's deaf or hard of hearing? What if you're engaging with someone with a severe, mental health condition who's unstable and you need to just de-escalate? So learning things like that and then being able to pass that information on to others so that they're just at least aware of what resources are available in the community, what things are being done and going well to protect and support people with disabilities in our community, I think has been rewarding for sure. That's been the most rewarding.
Melanie, what do you know about that commission, and has it impacted how you exist in Omaha in any way?
Yes. I have I benefited from it? I didn't know it was a thing until I got my internship at Monroe Institute. My advisor is the chair, and he says you need to come to these meetings and see what they're all about. And for me, it kind of speaks to this bigger issue within the disability community, is so many of us don't know what's there. And so, to Rachel's point, it's helped me learn too. Even though I'm pretty well versed, I've been disabled my whole life, so I've had to navigate certain systems. That's still something I didn't know existed. And I think the city of Omaha could do better at, just informing people that this is here and what can it do for you, and just create this level of engagement that's much stronger than what it currently is.
We talk a lot about city engagement, in the podcast and with Mode Shift. And I guess for those of, our regular listeners, you've already heard Melanie and you know who she is. But Melanie, will you just tell folks who you are, a little bit about yourself again?
Sure. My name is Melanie Davis, but everybody pretty much knows me as Mel. Call me either one. I am a second-year intern at the Monroe Institute in the University Center on Excellence in Developmental Disability. Very long title. Just go with it, everybody. But I am also the secretary of Mode Shift Omaha, which is a transportation equity group here in the city of Omaha. And we do everything from bike access to sidewalk access to pedestrian safety issues to building housing that's close to, talking about the idea of building housing that's close to bus routes, because that does impact people on all fronts. So those are just some of the things we do at Mode Shift. And my job is to keep track of meeting minutes and just try to keep everybody organized, because I'm hyper organized. So they utilize that skill.
Awesome. Cool. I know one thing in our kind of initial emails we were talking about is some pedestrian safety issues. And so I was just kind of wondering, from both of your perspectives, what does that look like?
I've talked about this before in some other areas, but I think I can elaborate a little more. Again, I use a wheelchair. I have a hearing impairment, but probably for me, when it comes to being a pedestrian, the things that I am impacted most by is sidewalk safety. And that comes from being in a wheelchair. It also comes from the fact that I don't do well in high noise situations. It causes anxiety. It causes kind of a sensory overload process. And I will just kind of not want to cross the street. I'll just shut down and not go. I don't know how to explain that to somebody, but you're on a walk with friends and you get to a street corner that's too noisy for you, or the sidewalk's broken and you're mentally shut down, your time with your friends is changed, because you have to work through some mental struggle that no one else is understanding. So for me, that's been a big issue with pedestrian safety.
So for me, over the years, I've gone through several stages of the way I'm able to access the community changing. At first, when I was first injured, I learned how to use Mobi, the public transit system for, people with disabilities who have trouble riding the regular city bus. And learning to ride Mobi was, it was fine. I did have some challenges with it, which I won't get too far into, but let's say a few times the bus driver would go to a certain place, the Mobi driver would go to a certain place where I wasn't, and I would tell them, hey, you went to the wrong address, and they would say, well, no, you were at the wrong address. That's your fault. So sorry, no ride for you today. So things like that were extremely frustrating and disheartening, because then back then I used a 300-pound power chair. It's not exactly just easy to call someone for a ride. And so then once I kind of moved on from using Mobi, I started driving and was able to access the community more. But then there are issues with parking, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But there have been incidents where I was in a car accident and all of a sudden now I'm out without transportation again. And so I need to look back into using public transit. Well, now I'm ineligible for Mobi because you need to reapply every year. And I had been driving long enough, I wasn't reapplying. So now I am forced to use the city bus. But I have severe temperature dysregulation. I get extremely cold very, very easily. And it increases my chronic pain. And then I have pain all day. And same with extreme heat. I'm heat sensitive, so I can't sweat. I'll just build heat in my body constantly until I reach the point of maybe passing out, or even worse, I could have a heat stroke. So the thought of trying to navigate in what I use now is a manual wheelchair, which actually doesn't go over bumps so easily in the sidewalk. That's really scary and intimidating, because all over Omaha, there's tons of broken sidewalks or places with huge divots and craters and things that really just make navigating difficult or impossible, especially situations where the sidewalks are far too narrow, barely wide enough for one person in a wheelchair. So I can't imagine how two people going in opposite direction would reconcile that without one person ending up in a ditch or in the street. So yeah, things like that, especially when I think of those who have to do that, maybe they can't drive or don't drive for whatever reason, and they really need the sidewalks to navigate daily, and having that just be a barrier to keep them from accessing the communities.
Exactly.
Needs to be addressed.
Access to opportunity. I mean, that's what we talk a lot about when it comes to mobility equity, or lack thereof, unfortunately. And sidewalks is kind of like the backbone of a lot of the transportation systems. Like, if you can't utilize a safe sidewalk, how are you going to get to the bus? There's so many issues with connectivity that just stop when the sidewalks aren't usable. So interesting. And part of what we like to do on this podcast is just highlight different perspectives, for people that do or don't drive, or the different ways they get around town. So appreciate your insight on that. I guess I was just reading recently. Jeff Speck is an author and smart engineer, human. He wrote a book called Walkable City. And I was just kind of flipping through this, and he starts kind of talking about a general theory of walkability. And he talks about how, in order for people to use sidewalks and use walking as a mode of transportation, sidewalks have to be useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting. And I was just thinking, when you think about the landscape of Omaha, how many sidewalks would actually check all of those boxes? It's just kind of, when you think about it that way, it's really, makes it interesting. I guess from the perspective of someone on that mayor's commission, are something as simple as sidewalks, does that get brought up? Are y'all talking about access from that perspective?
Yes, it's been brought up multiple times over the years, especially when we've had individuals from the community reach out and say, look, this is an issue I'm having right now. Like, I can't go to the grocery store, my issue is that we haven't found a consistent way to come together and say, who's taking that next step, who's meeting directly with the mayor or with a different commission to get enough eyes on this issue and get enough people to realize that this is something that needs to be addressed now and ongoing. Whose ear do we put a bug in, and keep having those ongoing conversations so that change is being made, rather than us just getting, kind of putting a little bit of effort into it and then get a bounce back and, sorry, we're doing the best we can. We have private contracted construction workers who are addressing these needs throughout the city constantly, the end, and it's like, okay, well, where are we going from there? That's been our responsibility, and probably shortcoming as a commission is actually finding out a better method to following up with these ongoing discussions that we need to be having.
That is such a trick. That's the whole problem. I think with a lot of the work, I'm actually one of the co-founders of Mode Shift and have been kind of doing some work around a lot of these issues for over a decade at this point. And that is, you just nailed it, like the follow-up piece and like actually seeing it through. We've also been told that Omaha is a reactionary city, and that unless people are complaining about stuff, things don't get done. And I think that's just ridiculous, and it's a poor excuse. But one idea that we've seen work in other communities, Kansas City, for example, recently, and I've talked about this on the podcast before because I'm so inspired by it, but they, as a municipality, passed a road bond, a transportation bond, similar like we did, that $200 million road bond. they passed one, and not only did they fix the streets, they took over sidewalk maintenance as the city. Because right now, this winter has been a weird one. We haven't gotten that much snow, but in the winter now in Kansas City, the city's in charge of snow maintenance and removal. And you know what? You have a tree root that is popping up a panel of your sidewalk. The city has to replace it instead of putting that burden on homeowners who may not have the, physical or financial ability to do some of these things when it comes to maintenance. So I just think that that's one concept that I know it's kind of a pipe dream for Omaha, but it's an interesting concept that, again, we know works elsewhere. And that's something that I guess I'm just wondering, in the work that you do, are you kind of looking at what's working in other cities and making those recommendations so that it would be a more sustainable improvement instead of just piecemeal?
That I love that you brought that up, Sarah, because that is a conversation that I've started to have with Melanie. That is not something that we've really done. It's been brief discussions here and there about, well, I've heard in such and such state or this place or that place. But it's like, okay, well, we've heard it. Well, what can we do about it then? How can we take that information to the people who can use it and have a great influence, right? Because I think that is really what needs to happen next. I think people need evidence that, number one, this is no small issue, and number two, it only benefits everybody to address it. And this is how, and this is why, and here's the proof of what's been done.
Yeah, awesome. Melanie and I just gave a presentation to the Human Rights and Relations Board, another one of the mayor's committees, trying to get the same kind of concepts across. And so I'm just wondering, Mel, how do you think that went? We haven't really had much follow-up, but I just kind of want to hear, maybe tell folks what we did and then how you think it went.
So it was a really pretty basic presentation, but I think we really hit home on the idea that, these accesses to busing, sidewalks, and your overall community affects everyone. It's not just about people with disabilities like myself and Rachel, but it's about my ability to make another friend, right? If I can go out in my neighborhood and meet my neighbors because I have sidewalks that are safe, what does that do for my mental health? What does that do for overall community connectivity? But the Human Rights Commission, I think they were very receptive in hearing what we had to say about, how can we address these curb cuts? How can we, address better citizenship follow through and just connecting with citizens and making them more engaged? One of the things that I've always said is that citizens aren't even aware that there's like an accessibility plan that the city's made. Most cities have an accessibility plan, but we don't know about it. Unless you force yourself to be engaged in city politics, you have no idea. And you have no reason to know, you have no reason to care, reason to be, invested. A lot of times I think people, particularly in Omaha, kind of feel this thing, well, if the city is reactive, why am I going to even try, right? We go into this cycle of just not really being invested in what goes on until it's a big project and everybody's mad about the money being spent. And then you can go on social media and read about 100 comments, but no one knew what conversation was being had. So that was interesting to me that people at the Human Rights Commission were at least receptive to creating a better dialogue with citizens.
Yes. And now the accountability piece is where I like to, that's one of my favorite words because it's something that seems to be truly lacking in Omaha sometimes. But I feel like, the fact that we presented to that committee and Rachel, you're on another committee, and it's like, these are not new conversations and they're mayoral committees, right? So like hypothetically, the mayor should be listening to what comes from these discussions and then doing something about it. And so I guess I'm just wondering, have you had any success with, does she ever, I guess one of my questions would be, does Stothert come to any of your meetings or does she have any feedback for you?
So we have a few liaisons. I'm not sure of either of their official titles, so I don't want to say the wrong thing, but we have a man named Gerald K. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but Gerald K. sits in our meetings. And then we have Keith Station, and both of them are in positions of leadership, working with the mayor. And so they sit in on our meetings and they are able to report back with other groups or directly with her. I think it's we need to have a more direct, we have written some letters for them to pass on, and just have some discussion notes over the past several months. But I think we just need to have a more specific focus. This past year, and earlier when I mentioned there's, I think a shortcoming in what we're doing as a board, I don't necessarily want to blame anyone in particular at all. I think everyone is, kind of doing the best we can this past year at this time with what we've been given, right? But now that we have new information and new conversations happening on new ideas, now we can do something different, because this past year we've been really focused on how to deal with COVID, how to uphold the rights, and accessibility and health for people with disabilities in the community, and provide them with information on where to get tested and how to get access to, what was I going to say? When they could get access to tests back when that was a big thing. And, so we were very focused on that. And then, we're always focused on the next thing, the next education piece for people with disabilities to benefit. But it's like, when we're so focused on all of that, we're getting kind of spread thin. So I love what you guys have brought up when it comes to, having those discussions and seeing that they're receptive. And now that they've been receptive to that information, these different commissions, okay, now how are we holding these groups responsible to say, look, we've discussed this, so now what are we doing about it? I think the mention of an accessibility plan for the city, we need to figure out who specifically is in charge of that, is directing that. And then, have consistent scheduled meetings with them is what I think should happen.
I think for me, what's interesting that we've seen over the last 2 years during this pandemic, what I've noticed is that the intersectionality between disability and human rights has really taken off on a national level, that we're recognizing disability has some stake in the human rights world. And so it's really been nice to see that that's even reflecting at a local level, Human Rights Commission wanting to hear about disability issues, because for a long time, we've seen disability issues just kind of being this separate thing, right? We've never wanted to be separate. We've wanted to be part of something. So we've made a transition to be part of something. And that's so huge for the disability community, even though it's still a struggle to have your basic human rights met. And that's where we're going. I think that for me as a person with a disability, I have to accept and be comfortable in the point that, we've made a progress in discussion.
Yeah. And I am, full disclosure, not the most patient person any of you will meet. So I'm always like, why do we have to wait so long for these basics? But I'm grateful that you're all continuing to plug along. I guess, so you're talking about so Keith Station and Gerald Kuhn, they were both at the meeting that Mel and I presented to as well. So I'm kind of wondering if someone, they don't respond well to me. I have sometimes some beef with the mayor, but Mel or Rachel, you delightful humans, maybe could follow up, or maybe all four you, Mel, Rachel, Keith, and Gerald on a little group email and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We are having these conversations. Let's follow up on what the action items are. Because I feel
make that happen.
That would be awesome, because I feel like meetings without action items just drive me bonkers. And I'm like, what actually came of that presentation that Mel and I did? Yeah, it was great to spread information, but information without action to me is like not quite enough. So I'm just wondering if some sort of a follow-up with some actual and now what are you doing with your new information? That could be kind of exciting to me.
I think that would be a great idea, because we've already, I have such poor memory, but I know we've had one individual from our board who volunteered to sit in with another group also involving disability rights. And at this time, I can't remember what that group is called, but kind of act as a liaison there to kind of get that information back and forth. But it would be helpful if I remember what that group was. But I think that's what we need, right? We need specific individuals to take responsibility for a certain pieces of all our initiatives. And I think that would be great if Melanie and I could get together with Gerald and Keith, so then I know exactly what does your day look like? When do you have time to sit down with the mayor or whatever other groups are able to make change?
And I think for me, when we have that, when I reach out to Rachel and we work on setting this up, something for me that I've always said, and Sarah's heard me say it, but accessibility cannot be a secondary conversation. It has to be number one, because the reality is everyone is what I like to refer to as TAB. And what that means is temporarily able-bodied. You will experience disability in one way, shape, or form at some point in your life. So the idea that we're not making accessibility the number one priority is really short-sighted to me. And I think the push to make it number one is where we need to be going.
That's a really great point.
I love that I learned something from you pretty much every time I talk with you, Mel. TAB. I was like, TAB, what is this? Interesting. That's cool. Yeah, I saw, this reminds me of, how we were talking about, like, when you accommodate folks with disabilities, you actually make things better for everyone. It's not like, first of all, you should just make sure that everyone has access to what they need, period. And also, if you could recognize that you really are making your entire community more accessible for everyone. It's
exactly.
really... Yeah.
Universal accessibility. It should be number one in everything we do. Because, like, I love a bathroom without a door, where it has a hallway that, you can cut in and take a right angle turn, and then you have the privacy, but you have not had to deal with a door. Wow, how great when you're a wheelchair user, but also how great if you're an elderly person or a younger person that might not be, or a person that might not have that strength for whatever reason to open it if it's a big heavy door, or a pregnant woman with a baby, or whomever. Like, the list goes on, but it's just like that open door literally is, like, to me, that sign of barriers being broken down socially and physically.
And if I could offer just something else, when we look at accessibility being part of the conversation, something that I've learned throughout my advocating career, I've been doing this my whole life. That's just what I say because I've been disabled my whole life. So I've really been at this for most of my life. People who go to school to become engineers, people who go to school to become contractors, all these things that are involved in building, a lot of them are not being mandated to take classes on ADA and accessible design. A lot of times it's an elective course. That is, to me, not recognizing where we need to go in the world, right? And I've given presentations to classes with social workers, nurses, doctors, people that are really going to be in the world of disability, and they're like, well, we've never learned anything about this. Like, what? Why not? So we need higher education too. Yeah, because they're going out and they're inner cities and they're doing things, and then it's affecting people like Rachel and I.
Absolutely. Along those lines, talking about engineers and planners who design our cities, but maybe don't have A, the education, or B, the lived experience. I mean, to me, I'm a bike advocate from way back. That's kind of how I broke into the transportation advocacy space. And it's like, something as simple as a bike lane cuts through a median oddly, and you're like, who designed that? Oh, this person who does not ride a bike. Great. And so it's only worse, I'm sure, when it comes to, like, folks with disabilities, and you just see all these able-bodied folks deciding what works for everybody. And if they don't definitely have the lived experience and apparently don't have to take the courses on it, that's just insulting. That's absurd and really inexcusable. Frankly, I'm again and again disappointed in just, like, so much of how, and it's not just Omaha. I don't mean to just bag on Omaha, but it just seems like I guess so much room for improvement.
I've lived in other cities and towns, and I can assure you that these issues proceed in other cities. They're approached differently, though. That's the difference, is how you approach things. You make more friends with honey than you do, otherwise. So you have to do it the right way. And I don't know that a lot of times you meet all these really nice people and they're like, oh yeah, let's do it. And then nothing happens. And I don't know what is going on behind the scenes to make stuff just fall apart. That's what I'm interested in, is how does it fall apart when everybody's so interested?
There's a lot of silence because no one knows the answer to that one.
Exactly.
That's a trick for sure.
And I will tell you, I will take your advice, Sarah, and I will follow up with Rachel. And Rachel and I talked before this podcast, and to quote John Lewis here, I think we can make some good trouble together, because I'm not willing to just sit around and watch it happen anymore. I grew up in this city. I came back from Minnesota because this is a city that I love for all its pitfalls. I love it here. So I wanted to make it a better place.
And we absolutely can. I think this is our first step, is what we're all here together to do with this podcast and following up to it, and getting our new team together.
Awesome.
And people are interested. I think as many people that are interested, there's only a small percentage of them that feel like they have the time or energy or caring. I hate to say it, but if you're not close to these issues, it's harder to invest emotionally in the outcome, or have that thought of the future that, oh, this could affect me too one day even. So there'll be a small percentage of those people who do become aware of these issues that actually want to participate in making a difference, right? But the more effort we put into continuing to work on it and advocate for this community, the more we put the word out there, that number will grow, right?
I think for me, we have to instill in these people, like Rachel was talking about, we have to really, really bring the passion to show people that they too can contribute to the change, because everyone who knows me knows I bring a lot of passion to the accessibility conversation. I live, eat, and breathe this stuff. Like, I don't stop thinking, I can't help it. But I think you have to bring everybody else to that same level of passion to make the change.
And really helping folks understand that it is a matter of access to opportunity. It's not just like a cute landscaping situation. It's like, no, this affects how people get to the doctor or get to the grocery store or to school or work or whatever the case may be. So it really is just, a human rights issue. And I guess I'm wondering, Rachel, obviously Mel and I send folks to Mode Shift a lot of times when it comes to people who are passionate and want to make some change. Are there any other orgs, or, is there a way for folks to get in touch with, the committee that you're on, or is there anything else that you would like send folks to if they are passionate about these types of issues?
That's a really great question. I'm glad you said that, because that's one question that I've actually had for a while too. So that needs to be another discussion within our committee, because we're always talking about, making sure that we have our meetings aired on television and having them posted on social media. But how many people really follow that or feel inclined to, or know that they can benefit from doing so? So it's been a discussion that's come up over and over again and then just kind of fizzled away. But that needs to come up again and have a decision made with how are we going to promote what we do? Because I'm not aware that there's anyone else that does specifically what we do when it comes to like broad overarching issues that affect the disabled population of Omaha. I'm not currently aware of any other group that does that. There are a lot of more focused groups that might, address, parents with children with disabilities, or individuals trying to get back into the workforce. I mean, things like that. But as broad as we are, it's almost become not a good thing. It's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. We need to make sure that while we're trying to serve such a broad cause, that we're still keeping that focus and figuring out how we're getting this information out, like who is doing it, what are we doing besides posting on Facebook, or how are we getting more people to follow us on Facebook? So
I will say this, Sarah, I actually do send people, if they don't want to go to Mode Shift, I also send them to the Mayor's Commission, because I think for me, I'm on the outside of this, and I feel like the more people I send to the Mayor's Commission, the more, if nothing else, it speaks to the Mayor's Commission's numbers of, okay, well, we've received this many inquiries, but yet we couldn't help them, right? I think that numbers speak. And I think if people that are higher than these commissions can show, well, this commission had so many people, but they didn't help them. That's kind of how I come at it with.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Just as far as like communication with the city, we have, so my partner Scott and I are always, trying to figure out ways to communicate issues about the city to the city and get things taken care of. For example, there was a light out, a stoplight, just completely out. None of the lights worked in Dundee at a fairly busy intersection, 50th and Underwood. And so we reported it to the mayor's hotline. It got closed. It's been out for 2 months. We've reported it 3 times, I believe. Always just gets closed. No follow-up. So the way that we actually got it figured out was we tweeted at someone that works in the Public Works department and copied the Public Works Twitter. And then it got taken care of. So it's just like, some of the times, and I am hard on Omaha because I'm from here and I love it too. And I want it to be better and more accessible and more inclusive. And there's a lot of work to do. So I try to tell folks to call the mayor's hotline, 402-444-5555, or submit stuff on the app. But I feel like, again, it's that accountability piece where, like, if you're just getting these, you ask people to submit a work order on the app so that they can hypothetically take care of it, and nothing happens for 2 months with the stoplight out, like that could actually be a matter of life and death. It's just, I don't know. I don't really know what my point is, except for it's difficult to communicate with the city effectively.
And for me with that stuff, something I just recently learned, and it ties to stuff that I'm super passionate about, is that the average reading level in the city of Omaha, the average high level reading is 7th grade. Where does that go? I mean, that means you don't know a lot, right? And it doesn't mean they're not smart. It just means that your level of access and opportunity and ability to understand how to report things is much, much lower. And if that's just your average, we have a bigger problem here. And so I used to speak just to this topic for people with disabilities, but now I see it in a broader sense. Plain language is Sarah can just laugh at me if she wants to, but it's like a serious passion of mine because it's important. I tell you, I learn something new from you every time I talk, which is part of why I love you. But that plain language piece is I had not thought about it. It just makes me so frustrated to see city documents put out that you can't understand, right? Like, so then what are you going to do with it? Throw it away? How many pieces of mail do people get? And they throw them away because they couldn't read them. So sending out a mailer that's not at 7th grade reading level, well, not helpful, right? So, and that's something that I mentioned to the Human Rights Commission is, what are we doing for plain language? And I don't know if they really understood where I was going with that, but I think it's still worth a conversation.
So many conversations. Well, I think we're about at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate getting to know you a little bit more, Rachael, and Mel, always a pleasure. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this puppy up?
I'm just very grateful for this opportunity. It's grateful to see the passion from both of you for, what we need to do. And I just look forward to us continuing to work together on this.
Awesome. Same. Yeah, we're never short on passion. The Mel and Sarah J team are a little fiery sometimes. That's why we get along, I think, Mel.
But now that you mentioned the mail, I'm like, are we allowed to access? Can we send mailers out to people, like notifying them of the commission, like what we do?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, ideas are spinning around. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think, that's the whole point of a lot of these conversations. It just kind of like starts new ideas happening. And then maybe, you never know what will be something that'll spark some change. So thank you for your efforts.
my final thoughts would be, the conversation is not done.
Right.
We just started.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
And that does it for this episode of Car Free Midwest.
We're here every other week with interviews, topics, and documentary pieces covering all things transportation.
You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Car Free Midwest, or visit us at carfreemidwest.com.
So subscribe now to Car Free Midwest wherever you listen to podcasts, and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/carfreemidwest.
This is a production of Figure Podcasts, figurepodcast.com.
With support from Mode Shift Omaha, modeshiftomaha.org.